Jesus once had an audience that hated him and wanted him nailed to a cross, yet for the rest of human history, he was celebrated as the savior of humanity by tens of billions of peoples. I'm sure at that moment though, when the crowd only gave him hate, it probably felt like everyone in the world hated him. In fact, to make matters worse, to quote GotQuestions.org, late in the trial, Pilate sought a way to free Jesus, John 19:12. It was a Passover festival custom that the governor release a prisoner to the people. So, in a ploy to appease the crowd of Jewish leaders who had gathered and to secure Jesus' release, Pilate allowed them to choose between a convicted criminal named Barabbas and Jesus. Instead of choosing Jesus as Pilate had hoped, the crowd chose Barabbas for release. Shocked that they would free a hardened criminal, Pilate asked, "What shall I do then with the one you call the King of the Jews?" Mark 15:12. The crowd cried out, "Crucify him." Verse 13. Now you might be saying, "Sure, but I'm no Jesus." But that's the point. If the most perfect man to have ever lived was able to find an audience full of haters, then none of us stand a chance. A crowd of people is completely subjective and not a good measure of approval. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible for that crowd to hate Jesus because he was a perfect individual. Thus, we come to a surprising and possibly disturbing conclusion. If you aren't pissing anyone off, or at the very least creating discourse, you might ultimately not be saying anything at all. Jesus was the most remembered figure in history, and yet, in the accounts of the Bible, a startling amount of people absolutely despised him. Everything he said was 100% truth, yet people still determined that the statements he was making were gravely controversial. A lot of people think that if you please a crowd, you're doing something right, that the higher of a percentage you score on your like bar, the better you're doing. But that's not necessarily the case. Oftentimes, it's purely impossible to say something impactful that's not controversial. In fact, I would wager that this is a general rule. Controversy can best be described as discussion, disagreement, and debate. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that saying something controversial always makes you impactful. Rather, I'm saying that saying something impactful always makes you controversial. In other words, not all people who say something controversial are saying something important. However, all the people saying something gravely important are by secondary effect controversial. Now, why am I saying all of this? Certainly, I'm not Jesus. But, nevertheless, this is a great example to demonstrate my point. You should not attribute all of your success to only yourself, because despite common sentiment, your audience does in fact play a critical role in the outcome of your performance. You should not attribute all of your success or failure only to yourself, because despite common sentiment, your audience does in fact play a critical role in the outcome of your performance. Jesus never did anything wrong, yet somehow he found himself in front of an audience of vile people that hated him simply for the ideas he represented, not anything he specifically did. If an audience had nothing to do with the outcome of your public identity, then Jesus would have never been crucified. After all, it was a crowd that decided it would be more fitting for an innocent man to get nailed to death on a cross over a nefarious, lifelong criminal. In this instance, the outcome created by the crowd had very little to do with anything Jesus did or said. The outcome was determined solely by the crowd's hatred of Jesus. And to make a quick detour, I feel like a lot of this is pertinent to Charlie Kirk. If you're someone who thinks he deserved his assassination because he was a controversial figure, you need to reevaluate that sentiment, because an entire crowd of people thought the same thing about Jesus, except in Jesus' case, we know he was truly a 100% innocent man. Let me just say that again. An entire crowd, and possibly an entire town, truly believed that Jesus deserved his death, as if he were a horrible criminal, despite him canonically having never even done a single thing wrong. So what's the argument here? Am I trying to say that I believe Charlie Kirk is perfect? Well, no, definitely not. What I'm trying to say is that if a crowd of humans are capable of wrongly putting a person like Jesus to death, then humans are certainly capable of wrongly framing a less than perfect man like Charlie as someone who was deserving of death. Conversely, if someone as perfect as Jesus was subject to the mob's violence and unsound judgment, then you are certainly subject to the same type of thing in your own life. In your life, you could make a piece of media, whether it's a book or a video, that is not inherently wrong, that is almost entirely just and true, and find yourself in front of the same type of mob that killed Jesus. People that hate you for speaking the truth. Usually, you'll know that you're in a situation like this when people seem irrationally angry at you. Their emotion doesn't manifest logical arguments or pointed disagreements. Instead, they resort to the only thing left, which is expression of disdain, hatred, and insults. When you are accurate enough in truth and conviction, people stop trying to argue with you. They resort to insults, hate, and violence because that's the only move left to do when someone hits your delusional nail on the head with truth. As for the example, the people in the crowd had no rational reason to hate Jesus, and they had no argument for why he deserved death. Their motivation was simply a deep indicator of the state of their heart, which was rotten to the core. Their motivation was pure evil. All that being said, I want to get to the main point of the video, which is that I believe a lot of people think they're bad at something, when in fact they really just haven't found their crowd yet. The more uncommon you are in the area you live in, the more unpopular you will be amongst the large crowd of people. That's why in the city I live in, popular people are oftentimes extroverted people who make a low wage and drink and do drugs like everyone else. The crabs in the bucket of the city tend to express hatred towards the others that somehow evaded their usual fate of being yanked back down to a life of familiarity, mild contentment, and safety. And you can see this when people that had moved away from their small city come back to visit. If you are an unusual person for your city, the biggest crowd in that city probably won't like you. And sometimes you need to find a niche crowd full of less common people similar to yourself in your own social circles that have more similar values with you than the popular crowd. And this applies to social media too. Seeing that a big and popular crowd appreciates you can be great, but having a smaller, niche crowd full of actual valuable adults who are subject matter experts, professionals, and valuable connections and are willing to actually listen to you, capable of understanding you, and have similar moral guidelines and outlooks on life to yourself is arguably just as good if not better. So let's plug my thesis into a real-life framework. For this example, we can use stand-up comedy. A lot of people compare a successful stand-up comic's performance with an audience full of people who actively sought out a seat at that venue to their own performance at an open mic, which is sometimes an audience of people who don't even want the stand-up comics to be there. The truth is, many successful stand-up comics would bomb in cities with opposite political leanings to theirs, and many more would bomb hard at a random open mic or opening for another comic who had an audience very different to theirs. All of this leads to my point, which is that almost every successful entertainer has a high selection bias in their crowd, because anyone that comes out to support someone is a dedicated fan by definition. And when you first start social media, you're expected to succeed in front of the open mic full of people that don't want you to be there. And anyone that's ever done stand-up comedy knows that converting an open mic audience member into a legitimate fan is monolithically difficult. Successful YouTubers aren't necessarily better than you. There are still a huge amount of people that disagree with them. In fact, it's the same amount of people as your own critics. The difference, however, is that just like a city, the account has grown its own community. It has developed into a monolithic structure of some sort. Whereas when your YouTube channel is first starting, it's more akin to a small village where you're subject to attacks from neighboring ideological tribes. Your comments may get flooded with critics and hate that seems irrational. However, when you have a community of sorts built up, your channel or your fan base is much more galvanized and now more akin to a fortress. neighboring ideological tribes don't see a reason to attack it, and the few rogue ideological invaders who leave a dissenting or disparaging comment often have no influential power in the comment section and get ransacked in the comment replies. So that's my point. If your channel gets invaded with dissenting opinions or even illogical comments, it is happening to you because you haven't found your audience. You're not necessarily bad or wrong, you might just still be developing a community that aligns with your own views and beliefs. To conclude this point, never forget that the medium is the message. Just like there are certain cities certain comics never want to go to because they know it would be adversarial to them, there are certain social media platforms that you should not start out on because you already know that it's simply not the right fit for you. For example, for me, that's now TikTok. Now you might be saying, but Andrew, you built a following of over 400,000 followers on TikTok. How could you not want to be on it anymore? Well, long story short, I liked TikTok a lot before about April 14th of 2022. And if you're wondering, that's the day that Elon Musk bought Twitter. You see, TikTok was great up until this point, but when Elon Musk ceased censorship on Twitter, the censorship refugees needed to migrate to a new home. And thus, TikTok saw a huge opportunity. This is the point at which TikTok became extremely political and insufferable, pretty much like a video version of Twitter, but with nobody else to balance it out. Pretty much just insane people with insane takes who have a problem with everything. Combine that with TikTok's enabling of censorship, such as being able to take down someone's video for only a single report or two, or for criticizing you, and these people fell in love with the app, and it's been their home ever since. So, long story short, I don't really have a good time on TikTok anymore. Anything I post, even if it's completely neutral, it's constantly bombarded with negativity and miserable people trying to start an argument with pretty much anything I have to say. Seems like no matter what I try to do on TikTok, I always get put on the adversarial side of the algorithm for my views. Now, personally, I believe this is a psychological tactic meant to push me into groupthink via an algo-turfed, artificial pre-selection bias. But it has simply never worked on me because I am not influenced by social proof. I do believe, however, that people with weaker minds might post an opinion, see that nobody agrees with them, and conclude that they must be dangerously wrong and that they ought to align with the status quo before they get rejected by the tribe. Anyways, let's get back to the point. Just like in real life, if somewhere isn't working for you due to demographics and politics, then just move. I can't even tell you how many people I know are absolutely miserable because they live in an area that is the antithesis of their ideal climate, political leaning, and government. If that is the case, you will be happier moving. The grass is greener on the other side when it comes to things that are this essential to your life, well-being, and happiness. Similarly, if you are unhappy on a particular social media platform because the core demographic doesn't appreciate you, or like you, or want you to be there, or have any semblance of a similar worldview as you do, you are just playing a rigged and losing game, and it's time to stop doing what I made the mistake of doing for 3 years. It's time to move platforms. I finally did this with TikTok about a year ago, and I've resonated far more with the people on this platform than any other platform I've been on thus far. And this is what I mean when I say the medium isn't just the message. The medium is also the audience itself. People who legitimately can't use YouTube because it doesn't meet the requirements of their short attention spans are more likely to participate in other lifestyle activities that you probably don't. In other words, people with similar attention spans to you probably use the same platforms, and people that use the same platforms as you are probably more likely to be your friend. And don't forget that many short-form creators simply can't get into YouTube because of the lengthy process of creativity it entails. Oftentimes, it takes more work than recording a video on TikTok. It often entails writing a script, using a professional mic with professional equipment and software, and a solid editing program. These aren't necessarily requirements on the platform, but they certainly help with establishing credibility to your audience and in the public eye. You are more likely to be friends with creators who create in the same way that you do, and for me, that has been true. I personally resonate more with the creators I've met on YouTube than the creators I've met on TikTok. Oh, and one last thing. Everyone seems to think that numbers are most important when it comes to social media, but I don't believe that to be true at all. Ultimately, what matters most on social media is the depth of connection you provide to those who view your content and who specifically watches you. If I have 100 viewers, but all of those people are rich, successful, or have a large social media following themselves, and are likely to reach out to me on email to offer a valuable connection, I would much rather take that than an audience of 10,000 children as my listeners. And that's nothing against children. I don't hate kids or something. But when it comes down to it, the most important thing is the type of person you attract. If you build an audience off of grievances and complaining, you will attract an audience that will grieve and complain about you as well. If you build an audience off of valuing creativity, your audience will value creativity as well. Thus, make sure you're the type of person who can attract good people to them in real life before moving the whole operation online. Another thing that matters more than just the metrics on social media is your reputation. Technically, you're risking people's time when you post. If you post something stupid or clickbait them or waste a couple minutes of their time, they will remember that, and it will be 5 times harder to get them to come back to the video next time. Instead, you need to build trust with the audience that every time you post something, it will be worth watching, and that you won't waste their time or take it for granted. Anyways, that's all I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed this essay, and please don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to.